Welcome to the Indie Pub, a laid-back interview show dedicated to the world of self and indie publishing. I'm your host, Jay Rushing, author of the self-published fantasy noir novel Radio, and a beverage buff with a passion for deep dives and good times. Every 2 weeks, a guest will step into the pub with a publishing-related topic and a favorite drink for us to explore and enjoy. Whether you want to sharpen your craft, snag a new cocktail recipe, or just have a laugh, there's always a seat and a full glass waiting for you at the Indie Pub. Welcome to the Indie Pub. Today's guests are Michael R. Fletcher and Clayton Snyder, co-authors of Norelska Groans, a finalist in this year's SPFBO, along with many other solo works. They're here with us to discuss what it means when a city in a book is described as or used as a character. But before we dive in, tell us a bit about what we're drinking here in the pub today.
Clayton, you want to fly this one?
Sure. I have a Jameson Black Barrel, which is Jameson but fancy.
Nice. I'm in the Jameson as well. The just the regular Jameson though, because I'm just a poor man. I'm a writer, so no fancy Black Barrel for this dog. But this is my swill, yo.
I just have the straight up one as well. Although I did see they have a stout barrel version. Have either of you tried that one before?
Oh, many times.
Okay, it's pretty good.
Really good. The IPA version, not my cup of tea. I mean, I will drink it in a pinch, of course. Mm-hmm. But the stout, so good, so good.
Does it give it kind of like a coffee note or something, or?
Yeah, I mean it's very subtle, just a slight coffee note. You get a little more of that sort of like chocolatey caramel kind of thing going on in there.
Nice. And how about the Black Barrel? What's the twist with that?
At least for me, it seems to be really oaky.
Nice.
So, yeah, there's a hint of smoke, but it's definitely got heavier oak overtones.
All right, so why don't you guys tell us a little bit about Norilska Groans and any or some of your other work as well.
Okay, well let's launch into Norelska. So basic idea, it's maybe a secondary world fantasy. Maybe it's an alternate history. Who the hell knows? And taking place in a very much Russian-influenced fantasy world. The hook, the kicker, is the magic system, which is based on memory stones and personality stones, wherein you can harvest people's memories or their personality traits, remove them from the person, and store them in a stone. That nice. Stone can then be worn by anybody else. So say Bob is super brave. We harvest Bob's bravery. Bob is now a coward. His bravery is stored in that stone. You give it to Sarah. Sarah is now brave as fuck. Cool. And so it's skills, personality traits, and memories. So you can steal people's memories and store those in stone. And the same thing. Whoever's touching the stone has access to what's in there. Whoever the trait or memory or whatever was taken from no longer has that.
I like that balance aspect of that, the give and take of that. That's a really interesting spin.
Clayton, you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So the book itself, the story itself follows two characters, Katiushka, who is her family is in exile in Narelska, and her kind of one wish is to bring the status of her own family up. So she volunteers for a police position, which she thinks is going to be a secretarial pull, and actually gets thrust into the role of a detective for the most part, whether she likes it or not. And then the other character is Jendi. And Jendi is he was a factory worker. He lost his job, so he's got a family, he's got a child on the way. So desperate for work, he kind of takes the first thing that comes along, and that is a job with one of the local crime families. And then the story plays out from there, where it's basically back and forth between these two lives and how they intersect and eventually collide.
Nice. And you want to tell us a little bit more about some of your other books that you've got out in the world for people to read?
Okay, so I've got 3 trilogies on the go. The Manifest Delusions books, which is like Beyond Redemption, The Mirror's Truth, Swarm and Steel, which is about insanity as a magic system. There's the City of Sacrifice series, which is basically people taking a shitload of drugs and making their hallucinations real. And I think I have issues with reality. And then there's the Obsidian Path series, which is about a man who has a heart made of stone, which has been shattered and littered about the world, and he's sort of wandering the world collecting the pieces of his broken heart. And each time he finds a piece, he remembers a little bit more of the terrible person he used to be.
So I have a I have a stack of books. And it's so I'll just kind of rush through these a little bit. So the very first thing I ever wrote was a trilogy called The Balance, and it's basically twisted Alice in Wonderland. From there, I wrote another book, kind of Guillermo del Toro dropping acid in a shady bathroom. It's called The Infernal Machine. The Obsidian Psalm is incredibly hard to describe, probably experimental grimdark at best. There's River of Thieves and its sequel, which is a parody of fantasy in general and society to a degree. And then there's Demons Inc., which is urban fantasy noir with a I think someone coined the term grim shoe for it. So so I think that's and there's Cold West, which is my weird Western.
All right, so let's jump into our topic for today. From time to time, I see readers comment that the world building in a book is done in such a way where the world, and particularly the cities involved in those worlds, seem to be acting as an additional character in the story. It's definitely a wonderful compliment to get, but it can be kind of a tricky concept to wrap your head around. I've had people say that to me, and I'm like, well, thank you. And then I think, well, what does that mean? I personally didn't necessarily intend to do that. And so I'm wondering for you, what comes to mind when you think of a city as a character?
I guess right off, as far as examples, right off the top of my head, the city, and I can't recall the name, but the city from the Gutter Prayer. That city has so much personality itself, and it's very much.
It's literally a point of view character too, as well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. From the very beginning of the first book, you see the city from the point of view of I think it's a bell tower or something along those lines, and it's definitely got its own character. It's got its own almost an anima that motivates everything that happens in the story. So
yeah, I mean for me, especially with the City of Sacrifice series, it's got city right in the name. I was very much trying to treat Bastion, that city, as one of the characters. And I think to some degree it comes down to, if you took exactly the same story and moved it into a different city, could that story still happen in the same way? And if you're like, no, if you switch cities, it changes everything, mm-hmm. Then I think you're maybe achieving some of that, city as a character thing, where the environment, whether it's, crushing poverty, a stone city rounded by a millennium of wind and sand, every little aspect and flavor sort of informs the story itself. I think if you nail that, then you're, at the very least, you're getting close.
Yeah, and Norelska, even Norelska is definitely, we had tried to move it somewhere else, and it didn't work. Norelska has so much personality, and it's again, like Mike said, the environment informs the characters, and it's this place that's more or less trying to kill you between the cold and the pollution and just the poverty and everything else that goes on in that city. It's almost the antagonist. So
I like thinking of it like that, like the struggles that the world puts on your characters, which will happen in any story, can be kind of so nuanced and intense that it is that protagonist angle. And so let's pull back slightly. So in your opinion, what elements go into world building a city? So I know that it's got to be more than just the setting. I know that it is for me, but for you, what are some of the things that you make sure that you bake in to the cities in your story?
it starts on a very visceral, sensory level. Like what does it look like? What are the predominant colors in the city? How does the air smell? Is it dry? Is it damp? Is it cold? Is it blisteringly hot all the time? Do people sort of slouch from shadow to shadow, flinching from the sun? Are they huddled against the, blistering, sleet? All these sort of like just basic visceral sensory things are sort of like your building blocks for that. And then like honestly the detail stuff, like what people eat, where there's a bakery and that kind of shit, to me that's unimportant and not interesting. Really, I think to successfully build a city as a character, and work it into a novel, you have to have successfully put the reader there. If the reader doesn't feel like they're walking the streets with the characters, then you failed in that. Doesn't mean you failed as a writer or you failed to tell a good story. It just means you sort of haven't quite managed to, create that city to that point. And not every book needs to. Like you look at something like epic fantasy, like you're almost never really going to see city as a character in a huge sprawling epic fantasy, because they're wandering from city to city and they're over there, they're up in the desert, they're in the jungle, they're over there. It's a different thing.
That's it. Yeah, I think in epic it almost feels a little bit more like pub as character or castle as character. It's more of a smaller scale than the city itself or the countryside itself.
Yeah, it feels more. I guess the way I'd put it is it feels more like a sketch as compared to a full-blown oil painting.
Yeah.
You're getting hints and you're getting ideas of what the city's like from architecture to the people, but you're really not getting into the textures or as Mike had said, the smells or the sensations that go along with that.
Yeah, and I like talking about that, the sensations and kind of the grit. And I almost wonder if the darker, dirtier cities tend to feel like characters more. Because I mean, if you have a clean city and nice, I'm thinking, kind of like the Metropolis versus Gotham angle. Like Metropolis is there, everyone knows it's a thing, but when you're thinking about a Superman story, you don't really give a shit about Metropolis. But when you think about a Batman story, Gotham is a huge part of what's going on, and it's always that big specter in the background. I don't know. I'd be curious to see like a really deep character or city as character situation, but in a bright setting. That would be a really interesting read.
Mike has done that in a twisted way. Manifest Delusions, the Geffergeist, the city where everything has to be perfect, where it actually becomes oppressive, where order is to the point of insanity.
So when you're world building your cities, do you think of your cities as actually being active and having agency to affect your characters? And I don't necessarily mean that as in, a building becomes animate and reaches out to grab the character or something like that, but more of in that kind of ethereal way. Or do you keep your cities more as just a passive system that affects the characters rather than maybe necessarily actively having it out for them? And I know that's a little bit of a wishy-washy question, but I'm curious.
Clayton, you want to swing that?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think maybe that's where the layout and the architecture of the city itself actually comes into play. How much of it can be used to confound a character's senses and how much of it can be used to confuse where they are or to make them uncomfortable or to just kind of screw with their perception in a way. Without the city actually, as you said, reaching out and grabbing them. How much of just the way the city has grown around them has become an obstacle in itself.
And speaking of growing around them, when you're writing your cities, do you tend to kind of have a starting point and then just let the details of the city kind of grow from that point? Or do you start with a good solid map to work your characters through?
kind of depends on the story. So like the City of Sacrifice series, all 3 books take place in a single city. Like the story never is going to leave the city. Everything happens there. So for that, I mean, the city really was critical. I think that's the only time I've actually kind of made city maps. And they were pretty crude. I wasn't like getting into street level detail because I don't care. But I had to understand, where the priests were and where the poor people were and the farmers and where the people, the craftsmen. I needed that kind of detail level. And think about the active passive thing. Honestly, my first reaction was like, no, it's all passive. But it's not quite, because the limitations that you create in your city impact the characters.
Yeah.
And it's not quite active, but it's not really passive either. It's those limitations. For limitations are story, right? That's where all the really cool shit happens, is when you run into the wall. So it's somewhere in between. That there's a fine line between the active and the passive in there. With if you're trying to treat your city as a character.
Yeah.
Now I'm rambling and wandering off topic.
No. I think that's a really good point, because there's also that, the kind of the how deep into the story the author is showing up too, right? Like, how much of that active city is just the author actively messing with the city to mess with their characters, and how much of it is more just the struggle imposed by how the city is built and laid out and all of that. It's a really interesting, hazy, fuzzy line in there.
Yeah, and Bastion really does have this low-level menace too, because it's got these gutters that are just designed for, well, drinking blood. So the city itself is practically this bloodthirsty thing that is also has to more or less tolerate the life in it in order for it to have life. So it's not animate, but it definitely has that low-level menace all the way through it.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And thinking about the blood involved in there, it's you're feeding the city, right? And any city has to be fed. Electricity, plumbing, water, like it's such a living, breathing thing. And if you don't care for it, it's gonna die. And then everyone else involved is gonna die along with it. So it's yeah. All right, let's jump back to our drink real quick. In every episode, I like to talk about smell and taste, the 2 most overlooked senses in all of writing. So I like to especially focus on that. So when it comes to your Jameson that you have, no matter which version it is, what is it you're picking up? What are some of those notes, those flavors, those smells that are coming across to you?
For me, Jameson it's all the caramel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's I don't find that in many other whiskeys. I'm not big on single malts and scotches. To me, they mostly taste like licking some Scotsman's armpit. Like after he's been dead in a peat bog for a month and a half. It's just doesn't appeal to me. But the Irish whiskeys, Jameson, Writer's Tears, brain farting on some of the other ones. They have more of that, and Jameson, for me, it's like drinking this liquid caramel that makes me feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mostly get, a little bit of oak, the caramel. Weirdly enough, every now and then I taste orange peel. I don't know if I'm having a stroke or if that's actually in the whiskey.
I could get that. Yeah, I could get that.
But yeah,
kind of like not so much the sweet orange, but like that real riney, almost bitter.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that bitter rind. Yep.
Yeah.
It's the same with the scent. It's almost that scent you get off a rind after you've just kind of scratched the surface.
Mm-hmm.
With hints of paint thinner.
Right. Now, if you asked me about a half hour from now, I would have just told you drunk is what I'm getting from it.
Well, as Irish fans, have you guys ever tried Redbreast 12 cask strength?
Oh, No,
That
but
one,
I've seen it in the store though.
it's if you've seen it and it's not ungodly expensive, buy it. I don't know if they've quit making it or it's just become way more rare. But over here, it's become a lot more expensive too. But it is 4 Irish whiskeys. If you like that kind of sweet, spicy, autumn type flavors, the first time I had that one, I'm not even embarrassed to say, I sat at the table and hugged the glass and just smelled the empty glass for like 15 minutes. It's a really thick, oily, like it's a lot. It's a big whiskey, but it was just so good. So yeah, I just sat there like a baby nursing the smell of my empty glass, and it was wonderful. So if you ever see that, I highly recommend it. The normal 12 is fine too, but the cask strength is just bigger and more, and so therefore better, right? But
yeah. All right, cool. I gotta look next time I'm in the store.
what are some of your? So you mentioned some of your other go-to Irishes, but how about you, Clayton? What are your?
As opposed to Mike, I actually don't mind Scotch every now and then. So probably Glenfiddich 15 is easily one of my favorites. It's smooth. It's not super peaty. It's not smoky. It's probably the smoothest drinks I've had. On the other side of that, Talisker Storm tastes like a campfire. It's not bad in small amounts, but it is incredibly smoky.
Yeah.
Those are very good. I think I have a Balvenie, which is excellent. I might even have an Ardbeg, but yeah, they're all varying degrees of very similar. You typically pick up more chocolate and smoke in those than you do anything else.
Yeah. Okay, so looking back at our city as character, I've seen the city as character compliment directed at both of you guys for both Norilska Groans and some of your other books. And so I'm curious, thinking to your whole catalog, what are some of the cities you think that applies to?
Within our own stuff?
Yeah, so like thinking about like so not necessarily you giving yourself your own compliment, but basically
right.
what are within your books? Which are the ones you think approach being a character the most, whether you intended it to be or not?
Yeah, for me, I mean, Bastion in the City of Sacrifice books, that was very, very intentional. I could not say that about the Manifest Illusion books at all, but I would say I was trying to treat the world itself as a character in those. So those books, they pop from city to city. They're moving quickly. They're on the run the whole time. So there is no city as character going on there, but I was very much trying for a world as character kind of feel. And honestly, I would never for the Blackstone Heart, the Obsidian Path books. Honestly, I couldn't say that about anything in there.
Yeah, I think for me, the only book that really approaches it is the Obsidian Psalm, and that's Golgotha, the central city, it's the last city, and it's a necropolis. It's populated with the few survivors and the dead, and that's it. I mean, and even then, being outside the city can kill you. So nobody really leaves, and that informs everything else, because the city itself, the center of the city, is a battleground. So.
And so how about other authors? So books you've read where you're just like, oh my God, that city. And it just really, really impressed upon you in a strong way.
I got Krystle Matar's Legacy of the Brightwash. Basically, the whole story happens in one city. And that she did that so fucking well.
I've got to read that book. I've seen nothing but just intense praise for that book.
So Clayton and I have a book in the SBFBO finals.
Mm-hmm.
But if Krystle doesn't win it, I will be unhappy.
Yeah, it'd be a travesty. That book is so put together. It's unbelievable.
But so the way she treats the city, the way it influences all of it, like the flow of, I mean, literally from the river going through it, flow of characters. So well done.
Yep.
That's second to the one Clayton mentioned, The Gutter Prayer by Gareth Ryder Hanrahan, where the character, the city literally is sort of a point of view character. Legacy of the Brightwash.
I'd probably add Nora Jemisin's The City We Became, which is literally about New York having agency. So it started as a short story, and it was so brilliant. And I haven't had the chance to read the book, but I'm assuming that it follows suit. So Brightwash is Yelsmer in Brightwash is just brilliantly constructed. So,
well, thinking about those, without spoilers, what are some of the details or techniques or turns of phrase that really made those cities pop and come to life? Can you think of certain scenes or certain, I don't know, anything that really, really stood out to you in that regard or category?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like in Brightwash, as Mike had mentioned, there's two scenes that really kind of popped out to me. One is there is a fight being staged at this kind of lower city pub or a fight club of sorts, and it's everything about the place just kind of comes to life. It's you can smell the sawdust on the floor and the blood on the mat and all this. And there's another scene that gets shifted where it's just people talking on the river, but they're standing on the docks, and it's the movement of the docks, and it's people being jostled around, and the way the flow of the river affects them, and everything else is just so well choreographed.
Yeah, there is a cohesiveness to Krystle's vision of the city that it never lets up. From the way people dress in different classes, to how they interact at different sort of class levels, and it all ties together, like from the poorest street bum to the nobility, to the guy who owns the gun manufacturing factory. There's a cohesiveness through all of it in how they interact with each other, how they dress, and that honestly, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
It is so well done, and it's not in your face at all. You're there. It's so well put together. Like, she clearly has this like crystal clear vision in mind of what the city is, what the people are like, how they dress, the way they stand when they duck out of the rain to have a cigarette. There's all these little details, on like interaction levels, and like who's going to have a cigarette with whom. And then there are scenes where the characters will just sort of like sit and have a whiskey together and talk, and they're fucking so beautiful.
Yep.
So thinking about that cohesiveness from the city's angle, is it like exerting a power as the city being a container for all of this, or is it more of the city almost exerting a pressure on all of the characters? Is it a mix of both?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it's more like, the way Mike put it is it's a cohesiveness. It's almost like the city is the body, and the people in it are the cells and the organs, and it just all works together perfectly. So,
yeah, the people are the blood, and the blood gets spilled.
So you talked a little bit earlier about, in your own writing, sometimes Cydia's character works and sometimes it's not necessary. Sometimes you don't want it. Can you talk a little bit more about what it is in a story that might make you choose to go for it with the city, or maybe pull back a little bit? Or what are some of the guiding details for you to make that decision?
I don't know that I ever consciously make the decision.
Gotcha.
It's whether it fits the story or not. With like Demons Inc., the city wasn't important. It was the characters who were. It's I wanted to just play with that noir gumshoe, that whole personality, and that was the important part to me. It didn't really. The city could have been set anywhere, honestly, as long as it was kind of gritty and kind of dirty. But I don't know that I ever consciously make that decision. It's just if it fits the story, it goes in, and if not, then I throw it in the background. So.
For me, it's a question of how much of the story takes place in that one city. If it's a story where there's a lot of movement, I'm not going to bother I'm not going to spend that time character building the city because
Gotcha.
it's there and gone. And, I'll try and make sure each city has its own flavor, but it's not as integral as a character, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the entire book is going to basically take place in one city, then I will very consciously be sort of trying to make sure that city flavors the story,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of a critical part of it.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that with Norilska Groans, you tried moving in and it didn't work. Can you talk a little bit about why it didn't work? What were some of the necessities that made it need to be there? Were they generalities? Was it very, very specific things to the story? Was it just a vibe?
I think so. The first book, so Norilska Groans, we've actually got a couple of stories sort of started in the same world.
Nice.
So Norilska, I might be misremembering here. I think it was sort of always going to take place in the one city. But then we were like, okay, we'd done world building beyond that city, sort of as background stuff for that first book. It never came into play, never affected the story at all, but we had it. And we were sort of like, let's play around in one of the other cities, like an entirely different country for the second book. And we started, and we both kind of felt like, this sucks. I want to go home. I want to go back to Narelska. Yeah. And so that's, as I recall, that was sort of when we went, damn, Narelska really works. Like that city is critical to kind of like the story or stories we were looking to tell. Is that how you remember it, or am I sort of way off base?
Yeah, no, I think we got a couple chapters each of the new point of views, and we both realized it just wasn't working. Something was off, and it was absolutely the city. The characters were, for the most part, right, but the setting, they weren't clicking with the setting the way Jendi and Katyushka had, and the city wasn't reacting the same way that we felt it should react to the characters. It seemed to be more of a static background than anything else. So yeah, I think that was the point when we went no. So
it almost sounds like the city and the characters almost had kind of a symbiosis thing going.
Yeah, very much so.
So thinking about that, then, how much do I don't know how I want to put this. How much do the characters feed back into the city then? So the city is informing the characters' actions, but are the characters impacting the city in any way, or are they just within that space?
I don't know how much of that we can talk about without spoiling.
Gotcha. That's fair. Very fair.
Yeah, for sure the characters, they do impact the city. The city is not quite different at the end of the story, but the way the story ends, the city is going to be changing. Mm-hmm. Now it's still Norilska, so it's still going to be insanely cold, filthy. It's still going to be a terrible place. Yeah, as just some people have changed jobs.
It'll just be terrible in a different way.
It's a whole new flavor of bad.
Yeah.
So what was it with Norilska that was the necessary element for those next stories? Like, was it a certain type of, was it an emotional thing the city was doing for the story? Was it like a physical or spatial thing? I'm assuming it was probably a mix of multiple things, but
I almost want to say it was practically political. There's definitely this kind of undertone of interpersonal and institutional and even for lack of a better word, cadre politics that go on in this city, and all of those things kind of meld and blend and interact with the city itself and kind of inform the way it's taken care of. So I think that, all the way all those things interact definitely had something to do with it.
I see. So almost more like the characters were removed from the system that was at play.
And we built this whole sort of like heavily Russian influenced, that part of the world that we were writing in, very much sort of a weird blend between like Tsarist Russia and early communism. And like, what else goes with that than like ash and snow and dead bodies freezing in drifts? I mean, where he was like, oh, let's write about that in the tropics now. I was like, no, it's just not going to work.
Yep.
We missed it.
Now, my Russian geography is crap. Is Norilska an actual city, or is it a fictional city but in a region of Russia?
So there's a city in a mining city right up in northern Russia. Like, I think it's, if not one of the northernmost mining settlements, called Norilsk.
Oh, okay.
And Narelska is very loosely based on that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and Norilsk is in reality, Norilsk is actually pretty bleak itself. They mine nickel, and they mine mostly nickel actually, but the pollution is kind of out of control, and it's very much a corporate town. It's considered a closed town in Russia, but it's also very corporate. They start very early. I had watched a documentary on it, and one of the things they did was for like school assemblies for 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds and all this, they would bring in the corporation and have talent shows, and then the winner would get ticket to tour the corporate headquarters or whatever. And so it's very dystopian in real life too. So
that's got a very Hunger Games edge to it.
Right. So.
All right, so let's jump back to our drink, and I've got a small challenge for you if you're up for it. So thinking about a nice glass of Jameson, thinking about the right mood for the drink, thinking about the right location for the drink, would each of you be willing to create a scene? What would be, if you could build do some world building to build your perfect setting to sit down and enjoy a Jameson to the best point it can be enjoyed, what would that look like to you?
Yeah, I suspect they're going to be fairly similar. For me, so my dad lives in this little cottage up on Lake Huron in this dinky little town called Kincardine. The perfect Jameson is sitting out on the deck with him, smoking cigars, fire going, hopefully not too many mosquitoes. And I was just sitting out on a deck, smoking a cigar and having a Jameson with my dad.
Nice.
Yep. Yeah, very similar. Dad is retired. He is actually in a retirement home. So one of our things is we go every Sunday. I pick him up and we drive around and we have cigars. So, we've got the Missouri River that runs through here. And probably perfect would just be going out to Missouri, sitting on the banks and having a glass and smoking a cigar with him. Just watching the water go by.
Yeah, it does. It's definitely a whiskey that just lends itself to a spot, like it feels like it fits itself to what you want it to be really easily. Like, it's a very easy drinking whiskey. It's a very satisfying whiskey. Yeah, I like those.
Yeah. Although, seriously, the Jameson people need to start sponsoring writers because honestly, we are a huge percentage of their sales. So Jameson folks, if you're listening to this, You need to sponsor a fantasy writer quick.
They found that quality to price ratio balance really, really well.
Yeah.
Like it's just expensive enough to let you know that you're not just buying bottom shelf rot gut. No, this is fine, but it's not too expensive where when you buy it you're like, oh man, should I? It's just that like, yep, this is fine. This is comfortable, this is good.
And it comes in very large bottles.
What's that?
Right.
It comes in very large bottles.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've seen the ones the bar style where the label's upside down so it can go into the dispenser. Just one of those in a curly straw and you're ready to go.
Right.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about how the cities can seem like the character in the story, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper to talk about the elements of the setting of the world of the city. And I want us to think a little bit about what else might be able to function as a character. So we've talked about it specifically for cities, but whether it's more of a small inanimate object up to, a bigger sprawling space, what are some other things that can affect the characters and affect the story in a similar way?
I'm actually working with an idea right now of a ship with AI that could feel very much like a character. A giant starcraft basically that would have its own personality and its own kind of environment and all that goes with it. Not very far along yet, but it's definitely kind of starting to feel that way, that it could be part of something. So
when you say AI, are you talking like a real strong AI, like full on kind of personality, interactive with or is it more of just the weak AI where it's thinking and doing, but in more of that real robotic way?
I think it would definitely have a personality.
Yeah.
How much of the ship itself it can affect is something I haven't got to yet. Just to make it interesting, I'm thinking it's only going to control certain parts of the ship. So
yeah, I mentioned the world as a character, which is really just city as a character blown big.
Yeah.
And any Stormbringer fan knows, magical items as a character is fucking brilliant. It's honestly, it's kind of scaling the same concept, right? But the dripping bucket, which is quite possibly the world's most famous fantasy tavern, appearing in literally scores of stories by a dozen or more different authors now, different books. It's in anyway, sorry, I'm wandering off there. As character, weird little personality tricks, which is actually weirdly character as character. Yeah, okay. And I was about to start talking about characters as characters, so that's that's redundant. We'll ignore that.
Well, when I was thinking about this question, one thing that struck me, I was trying to think, well, what are some of the more common things people use, and weather came to mind, and how weather can so often be this big, dominating, life-changing, character arc-changing force. But in a million different ways, depending on your setting, your geographic location, other things.
Yeah, I mean that will tie into the weather, ties into like wherever shit's happening, right? So like if you're focused on like Norelska, the weather is massively important, but it's kind of, in that case, like the weather is background to the city. But it's for sure that cold is part of it. The snow is part of it. Yep. The City of Sacrifice books takes place in a desert. It's always hot, always sunny. None of the characters have seen a drop of rain or a cloud in their lives. So weather's totally important, but it's in those cases the weather is like backdrop to the city as the character.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a book where the weather itself is sort of more takes a foreground. Hmm.
Yeah, I wonder if it's weather in general, or if it would pull back and think of it as weather changes. Because I think like a lot of naval stories where it's basically you versus the weather the whole way through. That can come into play quite a bit, or wilderness stories or things like that, where it's basically the only thing you're going against is, or the only thing changing throughout the story.
Yeah, see, I immediately start thinking ship as character.
Yeah.
Jungle as character.
Mm-hmm. Oh, jungle's a great one. Yeah, there's so much going on there. That brings it back kind of to that, multiple organisms functioning as one.
Yeah.
Ships,
submarines would be another great one.
Yeah, pretty much any locale, I think you can probably sort of, turn into a character, Das Boot kind of thing. The small city and the frontier.
What's interesting about all the things we've brought up is that all of them function to contain the characters in some way, even the weather, right? It's not the general weather of a continent. It's the localized weather where they are affecting what they're doing. Ships, cities, a pub, a castle. It's all these things where their movements, their actions, their decisions, everything it's contained within it, and they have to make their decisions somewhat based on that.
Right. I think one of the words that came to mind anyways was claustrophobic.
Oh yeah.
That the way everything kind of encloses the characters and keeps them tight. And that was the way we set out to write Norelska Groans as well, is that very tight, the very claustrophobic third person, and helps because you're seeing everything from nearly a first person view, and it definitely affects how the reader sees the world. So.
And I was going to ask with the scope within Norelska Groans, is it, you say it's tight, is it that real kind of street by street, quick turns down the alley style of kind of camera over the shoulder vibe, or is it more of the, you're looking at the street but a couple blocks out? Or
no, it's claustrophobic. It's very tight, camera right over the shoulder. You've got two POV characters, and it never strays. Anything they don't know, you don't know, and everything, every description, every flavor, every scent is filtered through their personality before the reader gets to see it. So we've got scenes where Clayton's character sees exactly the same thing as what my character saw. And then you get to see them from two different points of view. Exactly the same scene, filtered through a different personality. So it's in that, super tight. Claustrophobic was very much the goal.
I see. So you guys each took a character to write, then that's how you split the co-authoring duties?
Yep.
Nice. So that's interesting then. So thinking of the city as a character, so here's a question for you. Do you think that not your character's conception of what the city was and is, but do you think your conceptions as the two authors ended up the same, or do you think you each had your own unique spin on what the city was?
I think we're pretty much on the same page as far as the city goes. Yeah. We when we were working, we edited back and forth, and I think that helped both kind of gel the vision of the city, and it helped, at least to help me kind of pick up some of Mike's voice, which bled over into the descriptions and all of that as well. So
gotcha.
Yeah. And anytime a character went somewhere new in the city that nobody had been before, whoever was writing that kind of decided what that part of the city was like. Yeah. And so, like, Katyushka wanders into a library in a wealthier part of town. We hadn't been to the nice part of town until halfway through the book. And so it was like, oh, cool, this is what the wealthy part of town is. And then Clayton's character wanders into what was it called, Trader's Square or whatever, and there's a statue there, and the snow, he's wading through the snow. And so he totally defines all that scene. And so we have to read each other's stuff.
Yeah.
So I can go like, okay, now my character is wandering into his territory. I have to make sure that all the same important stuff is there, like the base reality things are there, and then filter the visuals that Clayton created through my character's personality.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really cool technique. I like that. Kind of, you're both walking around the video game map, making the shadows go away at the edges independently. Yep. That's
right. Yeah.
Were there any challenges in that? Did you find whatever one or the other had created was something that was a bit trickier for you?
I don't know if we just got lucky. We sort of like day one, before we even started working together, we sort of lay down a couple of like base rules, which was no deadlines, no stress, no egos. It's done when it's done, and if anyone wants to drop out, no hard feelings.
Cool.
And so there was never any stress, like sometimes chapters dropped fast. I mean, they all did. We finished the whole book in 2.5 months. It was insane.
Oh, wow.
But because we sort of went in and no one was in charge, and there was never an ego thing. It's like when the other writer did something, took it in a direction, you kind of read it and you go like, okay, cool. Like it's like reality, right? I don't get to choose what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. My character doesn't get to choose what his character does. His character does shit, and now she's got to react.
Yeah.
She doesn't get to go like, it would have been actually better for me had done this instead because I had a different thing in mind. It's like, that's not how this shit works.
Yeah. Well, all right, guys, it is last call here at the Indie Pub. Can you give the readers an indie published book or 2 or 3 or more that you really think people need to check out? I'm assuming Legacy of the Brightwash is going to be one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Oh, you want a second one?
I mean, just any that you've read recently where you're just like, man, people need to check that one out.
Sure. I just finished Bjørn Larssen's Creation, which is it's a novella, and it's fun. It's written in the style of Douglas Adams if he had written Norse mythology. So it's just kind of it's a fun read. It's my brain is getting pickled, so I'm not going to come up with a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah, I think ignoring Legacy, the last indie one that kind of really smacked me. Actually, there were 2. Never Die by Rob Hayes, which is kind of, was so kind of ridiculously successful for him. He's sort of been forced to write more books in that world, even though that was sort of the original plan. Never Die was basically like somebody took a kung fu movie and turned it into a fantasy novel. It was brilliant. Nice. And Obsidian Psalm by Clayton is completely mental. I picked it up because I'd written the Obsidian Path books, and then I saw Obsidian Psalm, and I was like, the fuck is this? And so I grabbed it, and I was like, I ain't even remotely related. And I read it, and it was when I finished reading that I reached out to Clayton and was like, shit, dude, we should write a book together.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously I've read everything Mike's written, so just take that and lump it into a recommendation as well.
There's, how much I have to pay him to say that?
Right.
He's like, cut me a check, dude.
Yeah.
Bottles of Jameson.
He still hasn't screwed up a book, unlike some of us.
No, I'm pretty sure I have.
All right, same question, but for any other media, indie or not, what's been floating your boat lately?
I just finished Gideon the Ninth, which was really good. I blew all the way through that book in less than a week. It was surprisingly good. I'd have to actually look at my Kindle to remember what the hell I've read recently, but let me see if I can pull my library up here real quick. So yeah, Gideon the Ninth was fantastic. An Altar on the Village Green was just another incredibly well constructed story. Nathan Hall, I believe, wrote it. And that's another indie book, but it was fantastic. I loved every second of it.
Yeah. For me, the best stuff I've read lately, Master Assassins by Robert V.S. Redick. Holy fuck, that dude can write. That's one of those books where you read it and afterwards you're like, I suck. He is so much better than I am. Oh my God. Just gorgeous. Absolutely love that book. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time, Children of Ruin. Those are two of the best science fiction novels I have read in decades. Yeah, I think those three books are the very much on mind right now. Oh, right, and
yep, go for it.
Pariah, Anthony Ryan. That was insane too. That was amazing. Sorry.
All right. Well, tell our listeners what you have going on and where they can find you and your work.
You can find my stuff on Amazon. So that's pretty straightforward. Just look up Clayton Snyder and you'll get a whole list of stuff I've written. Or you can find me on Twitter at Clayton Snyder 2. I'm number 2 because the first guy was from Lizzie McGuire and he won't give me my name back. So.
You can find me at michaelrfletcher.com, on Amazon. I'm around on Twitter. Can't remember what my handle is because who the hell pays attention to that shit? I'm pretty much around all the time, so I'm very approachable. And I only bite if you ask nicely.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Indie Pub. If you like what you hear, consider giving us a like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our indie investigations or boozy banter. I've been your host, Jay Rushing, and we'll see you back in the pub next time.